Hi, I'm George Hess. Now that you've created your poster, let's talk about what it's like to present one. In this short video, we'll show you some basic tips for how to present your poster and some common situations that you're likely to encounter and how to handle them. But before we do that, let me say a few words about what poster sessions are like. Poster sessions occur in very social and interactive settings. There are often dozens or hundreds of posters in very large rooms that have very little sound-absorbing material. Plus, there's lots of people walking around, often with food and drink, and they're all talking to one another. So poster sessions can get really loud and really chaotic, and they're absolutely going to be exciting for you, especially the first time. So you should be prepared for that kind of an environment. So let's take a look at some situations and how to handle them.
Can you tell me about your poster?
Well, the title of my poster is Poisson Regression Analysis of High School Football Prospects. I'm the author, Anthony Franklin, and I worked with Dr. Thomas Ryland. Introduction is, successful teams have elite players. In the expanding business of collegiate sports, losing football programs result in more than low school spirit. For major institutions...
Hold on, wait a minute. Rule number 1, don't read your poster. A poster is a visual tool, and you should use it that way. Instead of reading word for word, what you should be doing is speaking in a less formal manner, using the tables and the maps and the other graphics on your poster to hold the conversation with your viewer. Did you notice what happened there? The presenter was staring at his words rather than engaging with the viewer. That's not the right way to do it. If you avoid reading your poster, that's not likely to happen. So again, don't read your poster.
Tell me what you did.
Well, I worked with from California all the way to Florida, including Texas. And I looked at all the major conferences throughout the country. Oh, and I used the Poisson distribution as the distribution for my Poisson regression model. In my model, I used a natural log link function. And I noticed that temperature in spring football...
Hold on, wait a minute. Okay, things are getting better there, but they're not quite there yet. Rule number 2 is be prepared. Did you notice that the presenter this time was animated? He was using his poster as a tool. He was pointing to the maps and the graphics. He was engaging with his viewer. But didn't you get the impression that maybe he'd never even seen this poster before? Or at least that he'd never thought about anybody coming up and saying, "What did you do?" Be prepared. Particularly if you're someone who's entering your poster into a contest, you should expect someone, like a judge, to come up and ask you, "Tell me what you did." Have a 2-minute presentation ready in your head and be ready to walk through it when someone asks that question. Remember, be prepared.
So tell me what you found.
When one is looking to predict the rate at which states produce elite football recruits, there are 2 important factors to consider. 1 is the temperature of the state, and 2 is whether the state offers high school football in the spring semester. Not all states offer spring football. In fact, not many do. But for the ones that do, they often have a higher rate of recruits that get produced from the state. And for instance, the top 6 are Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, and California. Nearly 68% of the states produce less than 2 prospects per 1,000 football players on their roster. In fact, Vermont, in the 6-year span that the study was done, didn't produce any at all.
Awesome. Wow, that was so much better. Let's look at what happened right there. So first of all, I want to point out that that question, "Tell me what you found," is another question that's pretty typical and you should expect. Then, what happened after the question was asked was that the presenter used his poster as a visual tool. Notice how he pointed to the graphs as he was talking to the viewer. Notice that they were very, very engaged. Lots of eye contact, lots of interaction between the 2 of them. He also spoke in a fairly informal manner and worked through his poster in a very logical way. Very, very nicely done. Now, let's look at what happens when people start asking you questions.
What do you mean by quantitative variable?
Well, there are 2 types of variables. There's quantitative and qualitative. A qualitative variable deals with categories or levels of a factor, like gender, male or female. A quantitative variable deals with something you can count, a numeric value, like your height or your weight.
I was also looking at your poster and I noticed this. What is it?
That is Poisson, In fact, I used the Poisson distribution in my regression analysis. You use the Poisson distribution to count the data. In fact, I have some extra information here on this sheet. The Poisson distribution looks similar to this, just depending on what mean value you give it.
Let's examine what we just saw. There were two questions. The first question was one that the presenter was able to answer right on the spot using his poster as a tool to support his answer. The second question was a little more complicated because the answer wasn't right on his poster. But notice what happened. He was able to pull out another piece of paper that had a graph on it that he could use to support his answer to the question. Think about that for a minute. You don't have to put everything on your poster. It's okay to bring supplemental material. That's a really important point because what it means in terms of design is, again, you don't have to put everything on your poster. So when you're in that mode where you're struggling to think about what should I put on, what should I leave off, go back to the basics and think, what is my main point? What's the main thing I'm trying to get across to my audience? That's what belongs on your poster. Everything else you can have on extra sheets of paper that you can carry with you and use to support your answers to questions with graphics and visuals that are not on the poster itself.
So how did the model perform under a different link function?
Oh, it's a very good question. And I do not know the answer to that question off the top of my head, though I've seen the answer before. So how about you contact me? Here's my card. And if you would like, you can email me the question. I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Okay. And how did this impact specific football teams?
That's another very good question. Unfortunately, that question goes beyond the scope of what I did for this research, but it's definitely something I'll look forward to in the future.
So in these two cases, the presenter was asked questions that he was unable to answer on the spot. In the first case, it was actually work that he had done, but he just didn't have the material with him, and he couldn't recall what the answer was. Notice what he did. He gave the viewer a card and asked the viewer to get in touch with him after the conference so that he could supply the answer. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do and far simpler as a presenter than standing there with a pad and a pen and a paper and trying to write down all sorts of contact information or collecting 100 business cards.
How did this impact specific football teams?
That's another very good question.
In the second instance, the question was one that was beyond the scope of the presenter's research. And he just admitted it. Also a completely reasonable thing to do. You can't answer every question. It's great then to talk about how you might address the question, what kind of research it would take, why it's a difficult question to answer, and what you might do in the future. You might even scope out some collaboration with the viewer. One thing you don't want to do, though, when you're asked questions you don't have an answer to, is make things up. Just say, I don't know, and leave it at that.
So you guys hear about that dinner reception thing tonight? I hear the food's supposed to be
Excuse me.
primo.
I'm thinking about going.
Excuse
Are
me.
you going?
Yeah, I think so. I heard you're supposed to be a band.
Sounds like a plan to me.
Whoa, this is not good. Remember what you're here for. This is a poster presentation. Viewers first. Yes, poster sessions are social. Yes, it's okay to chat with people about things other than your poster. But when someone comes up and wants to talk to you about your poster, you need to tend to them. Not only could it be someone who you might want to collaborate with in the future, it could be the judge, or it could be someone who actually disperses grants that could take your research further. Remember, viewers first.
I thought he was a really good speaker. I heard the one at the dinner.
Excuse me. Hi, my name is Anthony Franklin. Let me know if you have any questions about the poster.
That was nice. That time the presenter was having a side conversation and noticed a viewer come up to look at his poster. He immediately stopped that side conversation, introduced himself, made himself available for questions, and then allowed the viewer to go back to reading the poster. Nicely done. Okay, so let's review the main points. Rule number 1, don't read your poster. Use your poster as a visual tool. Point to the graphs, point to the maps, point to the charts, and talk about what you did. Don't read your poster.
Rule number 2, be prepared. Have a 2 to 3 minute talk prepared prior to the session. In fact, expect certain questions, like what was your poster about, what were the results, and what are the expectations coming from the poster.
Rule number 3, handouts are good. You don't have to squeeze every bit of information onto your poster. The things on your poster should be restricted to those needed to make your main point. That's all you need to do there. If there are other things you expect viewers might want to know about, bring them on additional pieces of paper, a manuscript, a computer simulation, whatever, but just keep them off your poster, have them available, so if someone asks you, you can refer to it with them. Another neat thing to do is to create a small handout of your poster that also has additional information on the back side. So again, handouts are your friend.
Rule number 4, if you don't know the answer to the question offhand, and the question is within the scope of your research, it's okay to get back to the viewer after the poster session. In fact, ask the viewer if they wouldn't mind emailing you the question, and you can get to them as soon as possible after the session.
Rule number 5, if you're asked a question that's beyond the scope of your work or you don't know the answer to, just admit it. If it's beyond the scope of your work, you might open a conversation about what research could be done to answer the question. You might even start talking to your viewer about collaborative efforts to address the question. But just say, it's beyond the scope of my work. If you don't know the answer, the thing you don't want to do is make things up. Instead, just say, I don't know, and leave it at that.
And rule number 6, put your viewer first. The viewer is the #1 priority of your poster session. So before you decide to go into any socializing or texting or any other side activities, remember, your viewer is the most important part of your poster session. So always be ready to pay attention to them.
That's the end of this video. We hope you find it helpful and it will make you feel more comfortable giving your poster presentation. Thanks so much for your time and have a great day.